am Kirsten Moorefield, COO and co-founder here at Cloverleaf. We have an automated team coaching tool that reveals insights about you and the people that you work with, because we fundamentally believe no one should dread coming to work. Welcome to our very first episode of our new podcast, People Are Complicated. In this podcast, we dive into the human perceptions, instincts, emotions, and relationships, and all those things that cause tension at work. Because we believe that with deeper understanding, these topics can lead us to stronger, more impactful work that we are all proud of. We have so much to talk about because, well, people are complicated. This episode is part one of a two-part series where I sit down with Cloverleaf's Chief Research Officer, Dr. Scott Dust, to talk about the 11 common differences in the workplace. Welcome to our first ever podcast recording.
We're here.
Live at the Cloverleaf studio.
That's right.
In Covington, Kentucky. We are so excited to record a podcast, and we get to see a lot of people at work. You get to study it from an academic perspective. I get to study it from a user perspective of a technology.
That's right.
And we've seen a lot of differences that people have in their personality, their behaviors, and it causes either a lot of frustration and tension and conflict and coming home frustrated, or it can lead to people doing really awesome stuff together and appreciating the differences.
Yeah. So many different variables to evaluate, so many different angles to take. I think everybody has their own story. Everyone has an experience, and these experiences, they know it when it goes really well, and they can tell when they could have done something differently. So maybe having these conversations in advance can help people think about it live in ways that are going to help them on a day-to-day basis. That would be huge.
Yeah, so would you say our goal is to help people think through what are some of the common differences so they'll be able to pick up on them when it's happening live in a conversation?
That's right. That self-awareness, I think, is the first step for any type of behavior change. And a lot of what happens is unconscious, and it happens quickly. And so if you don't at least have some type of schema for figuring out what to do in the moment, it's just going to pass you by.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be sitting at night being like, man, that conversation could have gone better.
Yeah.
If only I had done X, Y, and Z.
Dr. Dust, what is one of the most common differences you've seen in people?
I mean, I think my favorite one to start with is introversion, extroversion.
Got it.
Because everyone knows what it is, for one.
Yep.
At least they think they know what it is. So introversion, extroversion, I think most people think of it as social ability, where introversion being, you like to be on your own, doing your own thing, where extroversion, you like to be out and talking with more people, and that's part of it. But I think if you peel back the layers, another angle in terms of understanding it is the fact that we all process information differently. And so in a workplace, it's more than just your willingness to talk with other people. It's also about how you like to understand and solve problems. Where introverts, they're doing everything inside the brain, and they're going through all this information, and they like to do some slow thinking, where extroverts think out loud and in the moment. And if you plug that into what's the typical workplace look like, a lot of stuff happens in the moment. And if you're not exactly, participating in the moment, then it looks like either you don't care or that you're not capable. And that's a problem.
Okay, can I tell a really good story on this?
Please do.
This just happened last week with Darren. So Darren's co-founder of Cloverleaf with me.
Yeah.
And we were in a leadership team meeting, and we were talking through our OKRs. And it's it's December, so it's an interesting time of year to talk about OKRs, which is how we set goals for the year and for quarters. And we were talking about Q1 OKRs, but we're mid-December, racing to the end of 2021's OKRs, and we're hitting them, and it's exciting, and some people are just really heads down. And then I'm trying to say, also January is coming, so let's be ready for that, right?
Sure.
And in the meeting, I was trying to say, hey, what support do people need? Because I know we're all kind of busy with finishing out this year, but we're the leaders, we need to be prepared for where we're taking our people come January 1. And I could just tell it wasn't getting communicated right. People are getting a little defensive and I don't have time for this, And so I just sat down to think. I just stopped talking, and I was just thinking.
Yeah.
And 2 days later, Darren and I are in our one-on-one, and he was talking about that moment, and he said, Kirsten, and then you went silent with this look of disapproval on your face. And I was like, It wasn't disapproval. I was thinking because
right.
I'm an introvert and it doesn't come out, like it takes like mental processing for the words to get formed in my brain to come out of my mouth. Whereas Darren's an extrovert. It just, you ask him any question, he's got the answer right away, right?
Off the cuff.
And so I think that's such a classic example of like, it came off as a silent look of disapproval.
Right. It was just you doing your deep thinking internally rather than externally. Yeah.
Which is better, because if I had just kept talking, I would have dug the hole deeper, right?
Right. And that's where the self-awareness and other awareness is helpful, because to the degree that you can be self-aware that that's how you typically operate, then you can have this conversation with others to help them be more other-aware. So, for example, when I engage in meetings with colleagues, if I'm starting to realize that, hey, I'm probably going to be working with these people for a decent amount of time, I typically say, hey, during these sessions, don't be offended when I probably don't say much during the meetings, because I am introverted. I'm definitely more in that introvert-ambivert range. And I will tell them where you'll see the most input from me is after the meeting. I will be the first one who will summarize everything that happened and make sure that everybody's on the same page with some written documentation that's, here's the plan, as opposed to in the moment. Now, I still do it in the moment, but at the same time, I'm expressing, here's how I typically do things, just a level set so that everybody knows what to expect.
Yep.
You can tell when people are extroverted, but it's a little bit harder to tell when people are introverted, I think.
Why do you think that is?
Because extroverted, it's just so visible, right?
Yeah.
It's happening right now, and you hear it and you see it.
Yeah.
Where when it's introverted, it could be more along the lines of, I just don't want to participate in this, or I don't think this is a good conversation, and my silence means that I disapprove.
I just a silent look of disapproval.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so do we have helpful tips, takeaways for people who might be trying to figure out how to apply this to their workplace and seeing those differences and how to leverage them?
Yeah, we should pick that apart, because I think part of it is, number one, becoming aware of it. Number two, communicating that to others, but also with that, understanding what to do with it. So I think when there's information processing in a team setting or in a dyadic setting, to be able to...
Okay, what does dyadic mean?
Sorry, it's a very academic word. Dyadic would be one-on-one.
Okay,
right, so this is a dyadic podcast.
Thank you, Professor Dust.
Where you have, if it's a team, it could be, technically a team is two or more, but dyadic relationships is the vast majority of our communication. It's something happening between two people. And that dyadic communication could be in the presence of more people, or you could have all sorts of communication happening within a team setting, right? So a lot of times when people are thinking about how do teams operate, it's a group of people sitting together in a meeting, face to face or on a virtual meeting, and how does the interaction go down? And so some of the takeaways, I think, can be recognizing that we need to withhold judgment, and if people aren't participating, it might actually be because we need to be the ones to prompt them because they don't feel comfortable speaking up or voicing whatever it is going on inside their head in the moment. And so like a great example is at the end of a meeting, if there's specific people that haven't said anything yet, ask them, hey, Kirsten, you haven't said anything yet. I know you're probably just processing everything going on. What do you think about all
As
this?
opposed to leaving the room thinking, man, Kirsten did not care. She was not engaged.
That's right. That's right. And also, if you know that about somebody, and others might not know that, or maybe need a reminder in a prime, saying that reminds everybody that this is a safe conversation, and that's actually okay. And so, for one, I'm signaling, hey, Kirsten's an introvert, everybody. This is how she processes. But then it's also reminding everybody and giving them a sense of psychological safety that, oh, it's okay to process internally. I shouldn't feel obligated to speak up if I don't have anything that I think is like really impactful or important to say. And that's an important difference, because a lot of times extroverts think out loud, and they think through things in the moment, in the presence of others, and they like that quick interaction and all the feedback they get instantaneously, where introverts, they want it to be completely clear on what exactly they're going to say, and there needs to be a purpose behind why they're saying it. Not all the time, but in general, that seems to be the case. And also an important caveat, it's not a dichotomous variable, introvert versus extrovert. It's continuous, meaning you could fall anywhere in that range. And so some people would...
it's a spectrum.
It's a spectrum.
In layman's terms, outside of academic terms, it's a spectrum.
Yes. Bring in that, yes. Continuum is, again, academic. But this spectrum, a lot of people are ambiverts.
Yeah.
Meaning they kind of fall somewhere in the middle, right? So if you've taken the 16 types and sometimes you're an E, sometimes you're an I, or maybe you're only a 60% or a 40%, one or the other, it means you're not too far along one way or the other. So you're exhibiting tendencies of both. And so recognizing that as well, because at sometimes your introverted self shows up, and at other times your extroverted self might show up.
Yep.
Right? So like in a meeting where you're super comfortable with the people that you're with, maybe you show up more so as that, ambivert to extrovert. But with new people or new situations, maybe you don't. That's important too.
Way more sit back and observant.
Yes.
Another thing I actually want to point out on this, so you did, a helpful tip on like how do you try to leverage this in your teams and in groups. I also feel like it's important to do some introspection and figure out where you fit, because we live in an extroverted world. Successful people are gregarious and they always have the right answer and they're fast on their feet, right?
Yeah.
Which, being more introverted naturally, I specifically remember in my like middle school and teen years when I learned that's not okay, and it's time to be an extrovert if you're going to be anybody,
That's right.
And so for me, like, it came with a lot of like you should do this, shoulding, as I say. I should it all over myself, and didn't actually realize what it is introversion, extroversion. I didn't have that language, and so I think it's important for people to know the difference. Yes, so you can read the room better, but also so that you can have permission to be yourself and understand. Like when I'm in back-to-back meetings all day, my brain just turns to jello and mush. By the end of the day, I'm really not productive. But if I can break it up with time where it's okay for me to sit alone. Like, so for example, here at the office, sometimes we're at the office, when I come into the office, everyone's desks like face each other where I work, except for mine faces the wall. And I was like, y'all don't feel rejected. Well, no, it's good to me because it allows me to like have less stimulation. I'm not watching people walk by. And,
really important.
And so I think it's just really important for people to know that about themselves, and also to be able to communicate. I'm not rejecting you by facing the wall. I love you and I love interacting with you, and I need to focus, right? And everyone's great with that. When you know it about yourself, you can put words to it, and then you can schedule your day and orient your desk around what works best for you.
And that's an important part, because the energy is what you're speaking to, right? Your mind turns to jello after you've been engaged in all of these interactions, back to back to back to back. And a lot of it has to do with energy, right? So introverts, it's an energy drain when we gain in all these interactions, but for extroverts, it's an energy boost. And so it does have a lot to do with our sensory processing and whether or not that deflates or inflates our energy. And to know that is important too, right? So if you're in engagements with extroverts and you're the introvert, recognize that that's energizing for them and do your best to participate in it, because that is signaling that you're being a good colleague for them. And then the same vice versa, right? Like when you have those that are just clearly overstimulated, they've been doing too much, give them the space to do it. And I really love the comment about making sure you're in the right environment. And I do think that we live in an extroverted world, in that as we moved to the service economy, the knowledge economy, and information economy, like more and more we're being forced to engage in knowledge sharing with others, and that's communicative, and there's lots of interaction that happens to do that. And so it's become harder in I think many academics' perspectives to be an introvert within the workplace. And so to tell a personal story, when I first graduated, I essentially was doing sales, and I was traveling 9 months straight. I went from Indianapolis, got on the plane Monday morning, flew into Maryland, and was in Maryland all the way until Friday afternoon, and then flew back. And then I'd have the weekend at home to decompress, and I do it over and over and over for 9 months. I was miserable, but I didn't have a language for it.
Right.
I was in a very extroverted job. I was on the phone all the time. I was doing face-to-face impromptu meetings with people I didn't know.
And did you think, like, man, what's wrong with me?
What's wrong with me?
Why am I not doing a good job at this?
And at the time, all of my mentors, all the people I looked up to, the media was all putting on a pedestal those that were charismatic and capable of engaging in that type of behavior.
That's, by the way, still the time we're in.
It is.
It's still what's exalted.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is an important attribute to that, right? Like, I have lots of friends in sales, and they're very successful at it, and it really aligns with who they are. They love it. They get energy out of it. But for me, I came home after about 9 months of doing this without ever questioning it, and just broke down. Like I literally remember crying on the couch to a family member, and it was in that moment I was like, I gotta find something that is more aligned with my internal constitution, because this just isn't working. And that's essentially when I made the change to get an MBA and eventually a PhD, to say I need to do deep work way more often, right? I can't ignore it completely. It's important to still engage in all of this activity with others and in the moment. But you can make decisions with how you work and where you work to make sure that you're getting more of what you need for your personality.
So you and I both have the experience of denying our introversion and suffering from it.
Yeah, totally. Right. And it makes it sound bad, but and it's not a bad thing, right?
It's not.
It is who you are.
It's a superpower if you recognize it and leverage it.
Yes. Because I also argue that, a lot of times introverts, because they enjoy processing internally and they enjoy deep thinking, if you look across history, and there's some great books out there that go through this, like Quiet by Susan Cain's a great one. A lot of the scientists and the researchers who have come up with big things are those that are capable and interested in that type of environment, that they can, really do some deep thinking for long periods of time.
There's another one that I think is similar but different to this, which is people who are more analytical versus people who are more action-oriented.
Yeah.
So, I'm actually, while I'm introverted, I am action-oriented.
Right.
And so I'm more prone to be in the meeting, all right, so what's the decision? 30 seconds to make the decision. Here we go, off to the races. Let's see what happens. Whereas other folks might say, wow, she just steamrolled right now and did not give us a chance to really get the data and analyze and see different perspectives. Sure. And I think we should wait another month to figure out grow the metrics and see more what might be the domino effect of this decision, right? And I think that one often can turn into, oh, she steamrolled, or oh my gosh, that person is disengaged, or they're just you can look at someone who's analytical and think, that person is a challenger, that person is never satisfied, that person is always poking holes and finding the problems. Right. And yes, they are doing that, but that's actually helpful, because if you make my 30-second decision, and that's how we run a business, or go start a new project, or whatever it is, that can miss a lot of really important edge cases or holes in the plan, plot holes, if you will, and cause more work and more inefficiency later. Sure. And so I've seen that be actually one of the biggest tension points when it comes to teams working together.
You can have multiple people that are on this spectrum of what I would call maybe risk orientation, and for those that are very high in this analytical tendency, they want all the information before they make a decision. They want complete information, right? No holes in it. It's perfect. We know exactly where it came from. We know exactly what it means, which we all know is impossible, right? You never know everything about all the information you're being given. And they want to be the ones themselves that cultivated it or understand it, because sometimes people bring information to you, and sometimes we don't necessarily trust it because we weren't the ones that found it and really understand its origins and sources. So all of that together is related to how we engage with the information and how comfortable we are with it. So those that are heavy on analytical are somewhat low in risk orientation. And then those that are more willing to have this higher risk propensity would say, hey, this is as good as we're going to get, and we have to make forward progress here. We got to get something done, right? That meeting, your inbox, as we looked at right before this podcast, is overflowing with messages that may never actually get addressed.
Sorry for anyone who emails me.
Right. And I'm over here with inbox 0, and I just have a very different work stream, right? You're being bombarded by people and I'm not. And so I think that a lot of times some of those conflicts happen because you have a very different strategic goal within your day-to-day tasks than some other people might, right?
Absolutely.
You've got to push through and make it happen and make forward progress because of the situation. And it creates these conflicts. And so is it good or bad to be low or high on analytical / risk orientation? Just depends.
Again, it's a continuum.
Yeah.
It's a spectrum, and you can fall on different sides and you can flex, but we all have our tendency of where our gut takes us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fun academic study that hits this topic. So most people in the research would assume that the more risk-oriented you are, the more innovative you'll be. Because you're willing to take information and come up with new, big, interesting ideas, and you go for it. And what we found in the research was that, yes, there is a correlation, there's a relationship between being risk-oriented and being innovative, but it's actually relatively small. And what we found was that when you had a leader and a employee that are working together, the employee is more likely to be innovative in their day-to-day decisions and tasks and ideas that they come up with if that leader and the employee are different on risk orientation.
Oh, so it doesn't matter which one is which, it just matters that they're different.
That's right.
Wow, that's interesting.
And the theory behind it is that if you really want to be innovative, the precursor to that is what's called intellectual stimulation. Right? You're thinking about things differently than what you have before. So if you're the leader that is high on risk orientation, you are more than happy to push forward and charge through regardless of having everything that you need. You're forcing me to think differently if I'm low on risk orientation. I'm thinking about all the things that could go wrong, and I'm thinking about the problems, but you're forcing me to kind of think about it from a different angle. And together, it allows us to engage in for me to have more intellectual stimulation, which then allows me to be more innovative.
Right.
And then the opposite can happen as well. Right, so I'm in the opposite seat so it doesn't matter which side it is, as long as those differences actually help each other.
That makes me think of, we talk a lot about cognitive diversity, another academic sounding term, but it just means people who think differently working together, having thought diversity. That sounds more approachable than cognitive. But yeah, like I've actually, that's interesting that a study that shows that specifically for risk orientation, but it's definitely what we observe across all the spectrums of introversion, extroversion, or analytical, action-driven, all of the differences. It's really about, do you have diversity here in how people look at situations, and do you have the psychological safety or the like emotional space where people can express those differences and it's safe? They're not seen as like, gosh, it's
a big part of it.
Low risk person who's asking all the questions, like, man, they just can't loosen up and get with it, and you start judging their character, right?
It's not an annoyance. It's recognized as a potential benefit. And actually, so this is a study I published in Personnel Psychology, and there was a similar variable. The extent to which those differences led to the beneficial impact of innovation was dependent upon the extent to which the leader was higher in what's called authority openness. Essentially, a willingness to listen and to respect the opinions of their employee. Right? So it only worked if the leader was actually saying, oh, I appreciate this difference, as opposed to having this mentality of, I want you to think just like me, which a lot of times is what I think leaders do.
Gosh, I feel like that should be the opening of the podcast. It's like, hey, basically, when you're open to different perspectives, you do really cool things.
Yeah, it really
so
can.
So have openness, and here's some differences to consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, what's the next difference?
Maybe talk about efficiency versus adaptability. I think that's a big one, too, where we inevitably, as busy knowledge workers, want to make sure that we are moving through and getting things done, and that's important because there's so much to do.
Yep.
And organizations, in a way, are built for creating efficiencies. Right? We kind of divide and conquer. We have layers of management, and you have to come up with efficiencies to make sure that you're bringing in more revenue than you are dishing out in expenses. And that's an important part of business.
People got to get paid.
You got to get paid. It has to be a system involved or it doesn't work. On the other hand, there is more of an adaptable mentality and this sense of things can happen more organically, and that tends to be more highly associated with innovation and creativity and everything else, right? So on the one hand, we need structure and we need efficiencies, but that can also in a way, kind of squash all the things that we need to have happen to maintain competitive advantage in the long term by being innovative and adaptive, etc. So, everybody kind of differs on what they're comfortable with, and a lot of times that can rear its ugly head when we get into these meetings of, what's the best way to accomplish our goals.
Gosh, it makes me think of so many things. It makes me think of the book Creativity, Inc. with Ed Catmull, who started Pixar.
Yeah.
And how they have this analogy of the monster and the ugly baby. And like every idea, every potential new Pixar movie when it starts is an ugly baby.
Sure.
Like it's got plot holes and it's like whatever. You got to figure out the story still. But you also have the monster of revenue. Like, I will eat the ugly baby, right? And so if you don't separate those two and give space for them, the monster's going to eat the ugly baby every time, and it's never going to grow into a beautiful, successful adult, right?
That's right.
And then I also think of like Google's 80-20. But what's funny is like even with all of those, it's like a business trying to create like a system and an efficiency to allow for
I know, right? It's
the
almost,
ugly baby 20%.
That's right? Can you create an efficient system for creating that more inefficient organic side? Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, it's really hard to do.
Have you seen that like some people lean more to one side or the other of that continuum?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's all sorts of different ways that we can evaluate what I would call individual characteristics or personal characteristics, right? People are complicated, and people are complicated by a variety of different things. They're traits, like introversion, extroversion is a trait. It could be about their values, right? What do you think is important in your life? It could be about cognitive orientations, so, the extent to which you prefer to multitask or not, the extent to which you're goal-oriented or not, or whatever it is.
Right.
And then I think this one is a little bit more of a work preference. And so maybe you could even couch it as a cultural work preference. Like, how do you what's the type of environment you like to work in? And so some people like to work in these very structured, formulaic, I know what to expect, I know what I'm supposed to be doing right now.
Yep.
And some people just prefer the freedom and autonomy of being able to do what they want when they want to do it in order to create something.
Right.
So I think of this as like a cultural preference, so to speak. And yes, people definitely differ on the extent to which they want to be in one or the other.
Right.
And I think a lot of times we end up adapting to whatever we have to do, given whatever this top-down structure has been given to us, or each manager of a specific team might have their preference, and then we find ourselves trying to kind of figure out what that is and adapting to that, because we know that's who we should be kind of looking up to for guidance. So it's tricky.
I've just seen that play out in so many different ways too, and like different businesses I've been a part of, or like clients that we've worked with, and I feel like it's also a really big stress trigger. Like if you're more to the like adaptable side and you're in an efficiency driven role or team or company, oh, that's so stressful. Like I've noticed for me, I'm definitely more towards the flexible, adaptable side, and but I have to be like thinking about the bottom line, right, as COO, and like I get really stressed when we're trying to solve problems in a 1 hour time block. It's like, how do you like look at this from different sides and like and like consider how do you do something totally different, new that you've never done before? By the way, you have 50 minutes to figure this out.
Yeah, right.
And come like the 40-minute mark, everyone starts speaking over each other because we recognize the end is nigh and like we got to get through this, right?
Do it. Right.
So yeah, that's an interesting one. All right, what's next on the list?
I like the goal orientation one. There's different ways to think about goal orientations, and the most popular categorization scheme is that you can be learning oriented. So your motivation to perform is driven to some degree by your quest for new knowledge and growth and development. And that's good for you because not only is it intellectually stimulating and fulfilling, you know that that's going to help you acquire the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need to be competitive and to be at the top of your game. And people can be compelled for that reason. But then on the other hand, people are also compelled to engage in what's called a performance orientation. And you want to prove to others that you're the best and that you can do it and that you're competent. So learning orientation versus performance orientation, and that performance orientation can be prove oriented. I want everybody to know that I'm good at this.
Right.
And then you can also be avoidance oriented. So your performance or your ability to show that you know what you're doing is partially because you're just avoiding the really hard things and you're only doing the things that you think are going to help you look good. So a lot of times when teams get together, very different performance orientations going on, and it creates a lot of problems. So those that are learning oriented, I have my students do this anytime they do a group project. The students that are learning oriented, they tend to annoy the performance oriented folks because they want to slow down, they ask a lot of questions, they want to do extra things that they know are going to help them in some way, and that's what you want, right? I want them to learn, not just try to get an A. But if you kind of transplant that into the real world, sometimes people think, you know what? I just got to get this done because there's a deliverable at this time and my boss is, over my shoulder saying, get this done and get it done right now. I don't have time to engage in this learning orientation. That's nice and maybe in a different thing, but not now. And so I do see a lot of people kind of having conflict for those reasons. I'm high on learning orientation. I mean, I will spend extra time because I find it interesting and fulfilling, but that can also kind of get me into trouble sometimes because I kind of go down the rabbit hole and I didn't necessarily accomplish the goal that I meant to, in that specific moment. So what do you think?
Oh, learning, definitely. But I think our culture is not okay with that. Like the education system is very much like, get the paper done, get it done on this time, and like I became like performance oriented through being American, And so I actually I remember, I have so many memories in my life of like going down a rabbit trail of just like, Googling things and learning stuff and being like, this is so interesting. I really should stop. I really need to stop. I really need to get back to, I really need to like deliver and like finish and like, I guess I can't tell anyone that I just learned something really cool. And it just this tension in my body. And I remember I took StrengthsFinder when I was like 23 years old in my first job out of college. And I was so embarrassed by my results because my results were intellection, input, learner, connectedness, which is a relational strength, but it's strategic. It's about like how do you connect all the dots of things.
That's right.
And and strategic is my other one. So like it's all like thinking strengths, and it was like the results are like you love to sit alone and think. You have debates inside your head. You love to take in new information. You don't know if or when you'll ever use it, but maybe it'll be helpful someday.
That's right.
And I was like, you know what? So I get nothing done. That's what this told me.
That's kind of cool. Yeah.
I can't perform, and so like I definitely know I tend towards the learning side, but I feel so much. Like requirement to be a performer, right?
Yeah, right.
And
for others and for the community that is that you're supporting, and that's great.
And I think it's not okay to be a learner in our culture. What do you think?
I think that having a learning orientation should be a given. I think those that do have a learning orientation in the long term will be more fulfilled and will be more successful. I mean, we are in the stage of economy development where we're moving farther and farther towards this extreme of knowledge worker. And the more that you can learn, the more you're raising your own capital in terms of potential competitive advantage. So individually, it is important. But when you're within a system of a team or an organization that has deadlines and OKRs and needs to have things done on certain times, you have to be careful because you still need to make sure that you're taking on projects that you don't have a high risk of failure, right? So that's having a little bit of performance orientation of a void. And you also have to make sure that you deliver and you deliver well. So performance orientation that is focused on proving that you can do it. So I think you got to be balanced. It's good to have the learning orientation, but it also recognizing that you just sometimes need to deliver.
I love the language that you're putting to this because it's basically like recognize what is necessary in the moment and give yourself permission for when to flex to which side of it.
Yes,
right?
I agree.
Which is such a stress reducer to say, like, you know what, in this moment, I need to perform. I got to get it done. You know what, in this moment, we have space. I need to learn so that in the long run, we can be successful still. So, like, I'm going to take the time to not check my email and read a bunch of articles about product-led growth strategies, right? Like, and just take in what I take in. There's no output right now, and that's okay. Like, this is a moment where that's okay.
And I think organizations need to get better at helping employees make that balance and make that decision. Employees are more likely going to stick around for the long haul when you're encouraging them to do the things that they find fulfilling, they find interesting, and that are helping them grow, learn, and develop.
Right.
If you're giving them the space and giving them the projects to flex that learning orientation, they're going to love that.
Okay, so does everyone have both?
I don't think that everyone is high on both.
Okay.
But I do think that in general, everyone is relatively moderate on almost all three, and then they tend to be high on one or two additional. Yeah. So, like, I have this group project that I've done with students for years, and they always have to show up and take this goal orientation assessment, as well as a variety of other assessments. And they have to then put in their individual scores, and then they have to plug in all the individual scores within a spreadsheet so that everybody in their team can see it. And then it creates this conversation of, oh, this is why you are so focused on picking a topic that is easy but not exactly all that interesting, low risk, versus this person who wants to go all in with this massive idea that's high risk, high return. It's going to take more time, and it's a great microcosm because everybody's got multiple classes, everybody has multiple objectives, and so how do we decide what the right thing to do is given everybody's mix? And these are the unspoken things that we show up and we're not talking about them, but in the back of our heads, we should at least be acknowledging them to then have a more thoughtful conversation.
Yeah, because we're not thinking in the back of our heads, well, I'm just more risk-oriented and you're not. Right. Like, you're thinking like, gosh, you're lazy.
That's right.
Why don't you want to take on a challenge?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that too, because this was another thing I wanted to bring up. One of the biggest challenges with evaluating people is that we have what's called fundamental attribution error. So when someone does something wrong, right? They just didn't do a good job on something. We have a tendency to attribute the reason they did it wrong to them personally.
Yep.
When we do something wrong,
there's a reason.
There's a reason. The world was just out to get me, right? Like, it's never my fault. So, that whole system of attribution is par for the course one of the biggest problems with working with others.
Yeah.
And that recognizing that we're all unique and that we all have stuff going on, and it might more often than not, it's both, right? It's the person and the situation came together that led to the outcome.
Right.
And it's just complicated, but for the most part we just say that person is lazy, that person is annoying, that person can't figure this out, and that's not healthy. We reflect on these episodes, and a lot of times we do recognize that we could have done it differently.
Yeah.
And hopefully it turns into a productive self-reflection instead of, I wish I had done this, I wish I had done that, and said, okay, well, next time, this is the way I'm going to behave. Because I think you can turn rumination into something that is more mindful.
Great point about ruminating. It turns out I do ruminate. I was ruminating on a situation about another one on our list, which is values-driven versus logic-driven. And this is more about how you make decisions. Okay. So values-driven is, I am concerned about how this will make people feel. Okay. I have a strong internal value system of whatever it is. That drives how you make your decisions, right? Whereas on the other side is logic. Well, 1 + 1 is 2 every single time, always. The policy is this, and so this is how we're going to choose and make our decision.
Yes.
And you can't flex a policy, otherwise why have a policy?
There you go.
Well, because my values tell me that, like, in this one situation, there should be like an exception. Yeah. No, we don't make exceptions because that's not logical, right? And so both are good and necessary. I am in a situation personally where I have to make a decision that is going to affect somebody. I'm values driven. I get stuck when someone else is going to be affected, and there's no good answer for this person, and I'm the one with the power, right? And I'm like, oh man, what do I do here?
Yeah.
And I was processing it with a logic-driven person, not in the moment thinking this person is logical, but I was just, I was like processing, and he was like, well, 1 + 1 = 2, A + B is C, and he just was giving me all these really logical formulas of like what might happen with this person, and I was so exhausted, and I was like, I'm ready to exit the situation.
Sure.
And so I'm talking to my husband about this, and I'm like, gosh, we're about to record a podcast on the goodness of differences, and here I am, like, I am done talking about this situation, right? And so I feel like, and then Cody, my husband, is like, Kirsten, that's the perfect example. There's no quick, easy fix. These situations, these differences we have always get us. Even me, who lives and breathes this whole world of the importance of cognitive diversity and psychological safety, I get exhausted by, like, key differences because it's still testing of like, it's a mental exercise, it's an emotional exercise, and then at the end of the day I still have to make a decision, right? And I still feel stuck because I care so much about the effect of it, right? So I feel I've seen that one a lot, obviously in my own personal life because it's such a strong one for me, but I also see it play out in the workplace a lot where, if you think of like 16 types, like ENTJs, like, oh, they're very logical and they're the leader and they just say like, this is the way it is. And then you can, to have people feel carnage, like there's carnage created from like a super logical decision made, and then it leads to like a bunch of people quitting a job, right? Like I feel like that's like media headlines, like CEO said this terrible thing, 20% of the workforce quits because, whatever, like backlash that comes from those things. So it's like, I feel like I'm painting logic-driven people in a negative light. You actually really need logic people. My co-founder is. And so I will get stuck on a decision, and Darren will say, Kirsten, it's just like this. And I'll say, thank you so much for that clarity. You're right. I'm super uncomfortable with that. And I actually really don't like that that's the truth. But it is. And so here we go, So that's a big one I experience.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the fact that you and Darren are that way, because I can see that when I see the two of you interact, and I do think that you have to have a level of trust between the two of you to let those conversations happen, because what you're speaking to is a really, really big difference. And a lot of times when it is a value-driven decision versus applying a lot of logic, it's probably something really important. Like the implications are huge. And so to be able to sit with that discomfort where you just want to exit the conversation. And
I'm exhausted.
And you're exhausted. And to know that you can't check out, shows strength, and that's good. But it also speaks to the partnership and knowing that I am going to hear you out and listen to you on both sides, right? So Darren will listen to your value-driven, higher order, more abstract rationale. And at the same time, you're willing to listen to that logic and appreciative of that logic, especially when it helps reconcile these conflicting values that you might have based upon a decision. And, it's, again, neither approach is bad. But if you can sit with the discomfort and build that rapport and that trust between both parties, you can make the most of it. Right?
And again, like if you can also recognize which one you are and when you go too far in it, and then when you need to pull someone else in, right? So like I can get stuck, and I know I sometimes just need to talk to Darren about it. So I just add it to our one-on-one list of a topic to cover when we meet.
And we should have that for almost every working relationship we have. Right? Like for every time where I'm stuck because of this trait or behavioral tendency or whatever, this is how I can get unstuck. Or at least get a different opinion or a different perspective to help me move closer to doing whatever I think is real. It doesn't make it easy.
Oh, no. No, because also what I'm saying here is you have to go with somebody who you know will think differently and probably force you to do something that's outside of your comfort zone, right? You don't think that way naturally.
That's right.
Most likely you'll disagree.
Probably. But it gives you a different perspective.
Yeah,
it'll help.
All right, what's next on the list?
Agreeableness versus disagreeableness.
Okay, so with this one, it sounds like there's a clear right and wrong answer.
But there's not.
Oh, tell us how.
I hate that there's like this negative connotation to some of the wording within some of the most popular personality traits that are out there, because they shouldn't be that way. So, for example, agreeableness, disagreeableness is the extent to which you want harmony, right? On the agreeableness side, like you really are seeking harmony. You want people to get along. You want them to engage with each other in a way that everybody walks away happy, versus disagreeable, meaning your willingness to disagree with people and have that constructive conversation on whether or not you think there's other alternatives. And so
it doesn't mean like problem starter.
No, right.
Conflict instigator.
That's right. Well, what's interesting is that both of them actually can be bad.
Yeah.
Right? So disagreeableness, that can be bad if they're coming at the conversation with this sense of I'm right, everybody else is wrong, the problem starter, and they're just being obnoxious about it. But there is a really important construct in organizational behavior, this philosophy and this framework called constructive controversy, which is really about you're engaging in this sense of different ideas and different perspectives for the purpose of helping everybody, not because you just want to be the naysayer or the annoying devil's advocate because you want to hear yourself talk. You're engaging in that behavior because you want to help. So it's really hard to tease that out, but if the rationale behind it is genuine, then it's a good thing. But also agreeableness can be really bad in organizational settings.
Okay.
Harmony sounds nice, but if it's groupthink, just waiting to happen, right? So if everybody's agreeable and doesn't want anybody to necessarily feel slighted and their idea wasn't taken, the right way, then that's bad too. So at its face, we think agreeable is good, disagreeable is bad, but it actually depends upon what we're trying to do with it. It's going to determine whether or not it's productive or unproductive.
Okay, I have this makes me think of an interesting story. So I used to work at a marketing video production company, right? And so our job was to make a bunch of great videos for clients. And so clients always have feedback, right?
Yeah.
And
yes.
feedback when you're working in the creative world is tough. It's like, can you make it pop more? Well, what does that mean to you? Because I think it feels poppy already,
Yeah.
And then, the creative director and the illustrator and the animator, like, disagree on what that means. And, there was this healthy disagreeableness that happened where we would, one, with the client and trying to, like, have a good relationship there, but two, like internally of like, well, I think we should do this with the feedback. I think we should do that with the feedback, right? And it was this beautiful, great situation where we really respected the differences that people had. So in that sense, people had like a healthy appreciation of disagreeableness and always shared their divergent opinions, right?
That's right.
But at the same time, everyone felt overworked and underpaid. And I was fine going to leadership and saying that. And then one time my boss just asked everyone then and was like, hey guys, out of like 0 to 100%, 100% is like I'm max capacity. Like where are you on capacity? And a bunch of people answered 80%.
Whoa.
And I was like, y'all need to speak up for yourselves.
Yeah, why didn't you say this earlier?
And I think it was an unhealthy level of agreeableness, right?
Yes,
and so
that's
an interesting example because, like, obviously authority comes into play there, and obviously, like, job security and your thought process on all of that.
Sure.
But I saw some people who could be, like, really healthy disagreeable in one situation, be really unhealthy agreeable in another situation, and just flex on that spectrum.
Yeah. And I think usually you see a lot of the other where it's you get a group of relatively agreeable folks in a group, right? Like they're not afraid to speak up here and there, and they're not afraid to put their opinion out here and there. And then you have one person that's the outlier that just comes across as a disagreeable person. And that's just the way they think. It's the way they operate. A lot of times it's attached to that very logic-oriented mindset of, let's flesh out every single option before we move forward, and is always willing to kind of have that engineering mind and pick everything apart. That is so important. But how you present that information is almost even more important.
Okay, so if you're the disagreeable person, what is a productive way to present that information?
Yeah, I think it's really, for one, I mean, our tone matters, our nonverbals matter, the framing of, hey, I'm getting ready to bring up this point and people might not agree, but I'm doing it for the betterment of the group. Like, you can preface whatever you're going to say with the mindset of, I'm just pushing on this a little bit to make sure there's no bias going on.
I've also seen it be really helpful when people preface with, I like this idea. Like, just a simple phrase of like, oh, you're headed in a good direction.
Yeah.
Let's also consider. Like,
That's
just
right.
a tiny, like, half-sentence compliment to just let people know you're not coming at it like, this is all just terrible and needs to be thrown out the window.
That's right. Yeah. And that can go a long way. And just the tone that we say it can go a long way as well. I think people react to those types of things.
It's like it opens the brain to receive it.
That's
more.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so what if you're the agreeable person? How do you treat that disagreeable person to help them, like, help it be a productive situation?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think, so let's just assume that the disagreeable person, maybe they're not going to change their delivery, or you don't have time to do it, and that's fine. I think you can be the agreeable person, or regardless of where you are on this continuum, to kind of engage in what would be called like sense making. Let's make sense of this comment, right? So this is a good idea, Kirsten, who brought up this very different and antithesis of the direction we're going idea. Let's give this some space and make sure that, we're incorporating this information to make sure that whatever the direction we're on is the right path. And being the one to kind of step up and say, this is a good idea, to consider their opinion and put your framing of, here's why, everyone, this is good. Because it brings them back from, I think, the emotional reaction. It puts them into the mindset of the logical reaction. Because a lot of times our initial, whether our mind recognizes it or not, we initially react emotionally to whatever was said and how it was said. But you got to like embed it or frame it and make sense of it in a way that's helpful for everybody.
What I love about things like this and about talking about this and helping people start to recognize, any of these spectrums that we talk about, or continuums that we talk about, is that everyone has power in their own hands to change it from reactive to proactive. Like, even if I am the calm, agreeable person in the room, and I see this disagreeable person start conflict, I'm not going to change them, but I can at least start to recognize, oh, this is agreeableness, disagreeableness. And so maybe this person is bringing up important points for us to consider.
Right.
I sense everyone's getting frustrated. I personally feel attacked.
Yes.
But I'm going to pause and say that's probably not what they intend. Like, if this person has good intentions, which most people do, like most people, like 99.99% of the world is not like, I'm just ready to make everyone else have a terrible day, right?
Yeah,
So
they don't wake up thinking that.
So if this person has good intentions, even if they're cluttered and buried under some frustration, what is productive here? And so what can I do to help change the tone in the room? Like, you can reframe what is starting to be a rising tension in the room.
Right. When you feel it, you need to step up and be the person on it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the manager or the leader. It could be anybody that's willing to step up. The other one, and when that person that's being disagreeable or engaging in it, let's say that they're doing it because they are just a spiteful human being. And that happens sometimes, hopefully not very much.
And usually that's because they're a hurt baby bird with their own issues. And
and you're not going to fix that
in
a session of a meeting.
You're not.
The best way to fix that is through humor. Research is illustrating that, when you do have that person that is kind of infusing this negative tone, you can match it with the alternative, which is the extreme of the more lighthearted and positive with some sense of humor into the conversation, whatever that might be.
That's a superpower trick.
And it definitely can help diffuse the situation, or at least let everybody in the room recognize that this is a little intense as what's going on over here. Let's lighten it up a little bit, and it can change the course of the conversation.
That's all we got for you this time. Thank you for tuning into this episode of People Are Complicated. I'm your host, Kirsten Moorefield. Be sure to tune in next time for the second part of this two-part series, the 11 Common Differences in the Workplace with Dr. Scott Dust. You won't want to miss it. In the meantime, head on over to cloverleaf.me, find out more about what Scott and I do in our day jobs, and sign up for a free trial to unleash your team to do their best work. Thanks so much. See you next time.